The winter of 1415 did not arrive in England as a season, but as a sentence. It was not an ordinary. Cold it was the kind that paralyzed arms, cracked lips, froze boots to the ground during the night, and turned entire forests into black glass. In the villages near Sir Geoffrey's castle, men and women awoke shivering even before the sun rose. But for some reason no one understood. A wretched hut remained alive. Inside it lived Ellen, the widow. She was no longer young, nor did she carry a beauty that would impress nobles. She had no dowry, no important surname, or inherited lands. What she possessed were 2 small children, a hut half buried in the soil, and a silent knowledge passed down from mother to daughter for generations. How to survive the winter that killed the unprepared. Her home was a source of mockery for those who lived in the castle. Thick mud walls, a heavy roof of thatch and turf, where moss grew, a floor sunk half a meter below the ground, in cracks a mixture of mud, straw, and dry manure. Inside, everything smelled of smoke, sweat, and life. But in that misery there was a secret. Ellen turned the little she had into protection. She slept with her children, huddled under layers of wool, never washed in winter, impregnated with lanolin that repelled moisture. And more, she allowed the chickens and the goat to stay inside the hut, sharing warmth. The floor was covered with high mounds of hay, renewed regularly. Before sleeping, Ellen kept embers under the ashes so the fire would never die. It was hard, dirty, and smelly, but it worked. Meanwhile, in the stone castle, the giant fireplaces consumed heaps of precious firewood, but the heat escaped through the roof. The high rooms were icy caverns, damp, full of wind. Sir Geoffrey's children fell ill. Purple fingers, endless coughs, sleepless nights. Lady Margaret heard rumors. They said the widow and her children played outside with red cheeks. It was inexplicable. It was humiliating. How could a poor woman survive while nobles froze inside stone walls? The answer began as a whisper but grew like a storm. The poor knew something that the rich had forgotten, and that knowledge would be put to the test when Lady Margaret made the most unexpected decision of that winter. Inside Sir Geoffrey's castle, reality was crueler than any story told in the village. Expensive tapestries covered the stone walls, but they did not hold back the wind that pierced everything. The great fireplaces swallowed firewood day and night, and yet the heat rose and vanished through the roof openings, leaving only a damp cold clinging to the skin. Thomas, the 7-year-old son, coughed until he lost his breath, and at 4, cried softly. Even under thick blankets, servants rushed with teas, cloaks, promises. Nothing worked. Lady Margaret wandered the corridors like a ghost, imprisoned in her own castle. Her fine and expensive wool clothes became soaked with sweat when she approached the fire and then clung cold to her body when she moved away. It was like wearing ice. She knew something was deeply wrong, but she did not know what, until, on a night when the wind seemed to roar inside the walls, an old servant named Oswald spoke the unthinkable. During the silent meal in the great hall, he set his wooden mug on the table and murmured, "My lady, there is something you should know. Down in the village, they say the widow Ellen and her children are well, better than us." The comment fell like a stone in a frozen lake. Sir Geoffrey raised his head, offended. "That is absurd. How could a wretched peasant woman be better off than my house?" But Margaret looked at her own children, seated near the fire and still shivering, their purple fingers holding the spoon. She felt something break inside her. Pride. "Bring that woman to the castle," she said, in a low but firm voice. Sir Geoffrey turned to her, incredulous. "You want to bring a dirty villager into our hall?" "I want to bring someone who is not watching her children die of cold," Margaret replied. "Bring Ellen. Now." No one dared argue. At dawn, 2 mounted soldiers descended to the village. They found Ellen feeding the chickens, her apron dirty, her face marked by smoke, but her eyes alert. "Are you Ellen, the widow?" asked the one with the red beard. When she confirmed, the dry order came. "Lady Margaret demands your presence at the castle." Ellen felt her stomach sink. When Ellen crossed the castle gates, she was met by gazes that pierced more than the wind. Knights, servants, unless her ladies stopped what they were doing just to watch her past the dirty peasant who dared to cross the stone floor reserved for nobles. The hall seemed like an ice cathedral. Every step echoed, every sigh formed a cloud in the air. Ellen kept her gaze down, but not out of fear. It was prudence. The whispers, however, reached her ears like blades. Is that the widow? She must stink of goat and smoke. How can she help? Lady Margaret stood by the hearth, with her children huddled beside her. When Ellen raised her eyes and saw Thomas and Anne so small and so ill, something in her changed. There was no difference there. There were only mothers and children trying to survive. Are you Ellen? Margaret asked. Yes, my lady. They say your children are well, that you know things we do not. It was in that instant that Ellen realized it was not just a request, it was a cry for help. She observed the damp clothes, the poorly distributed fire, the cutting air, and gave her answer like a sentence. I only know how not to die when there is nothing. Lady Margaret stood and, in a gesture no one expected, extended her hand to the peasant, a gesture without nobility, simply human. Save my children. Ellen accepted, and that was how she began to turn the castle inside out. In the first minutes, she only observed. She touched icy walls, felt the wind in the cracks, saw the high beds trapped in the worst of the cold air. And then she spoke the brutal truth no one there wanted to hear. Everything is wrong. Sir Geoffrey exploded. How dare you say that? But Margaret, desperate, ordered them to let her speak. Ellen explained that heat rose and cold accumulated on the floor, that damp clothes were a death sentence, that sleeping separately in huge rooms was madness. When the cold wanted in, and then came the suggestion that made the entire hall tremble. And you need to bring the animals inside. Laughter, indignation, muffled insults. Sir Geoffrey nearly lost control. But Margaret's eyes fell on her children, not on titles, not on rugs, nor on pride. Do as she says. A phrase that divided the castle. A decision that opened a silent war, and a small truth no one would admit aloud. In that winter, the future of the nobility was in the hands of a peasant woman no one respected. Ellen began her work like someone carrying out a vital mission. She ordered the high beds dismantled and rebuilt almost at ground level, where the cold air did not accumulate so strongly. The carpenters grumbled, indignant at the idea of destroying precious wood to copy it like the village huts. Still, they obeyed. Then came something that made even the servants cross themselves. Ellen prepared the mixture of mud, straw, and dry manure used to seal cracks in the hut. This will rot the walls, some complained. But when she began applying the thick paste to the cracks, the wind that once pierced the room diminished to just a whisper. Ellen worked without pause. She ordered old curtains and tapestries torn and hung as barriers against the cold. She ordered the excess ashes removed from the hearth and the embers distributed throughout the house in small pots to keep the air warm. And finally, she brought 3 live chickens inside. That was when Sir Geoffrey lost his patience. In my castle, there will be no animals sleeping beside nobles. Ellen simply replied, They will not sleep with you. They will sleep with the children, and they will wake up alive. Everyone laughed. But the next morning, Thomas woke without the suffocating cough and breathed more calmly. Lady Margaret herself would never forget that night. She saw Ellen place heated stones at the children's feet. She saw the calloused hands, the speed with which she understood the danger of wind and dampness. She saw that that widow was not improvising. She mastered the winter. In a few days, the castle began to change. The corridors seemed less hostile. The fire lasted longer. The children stopped getting sick, and people whispered in the corners. Fearing to admit the truth, the peasant woman was defeating the cold that the nobles did not know how to conquer. But when Ellen gained ground, someone lost power. And no one felt it more than Lady Isabel, Sir Geoffrey's cousin. As beautiful as she was poisonous, Isabel watched everything from the corners of the rooms, pursing her lips at the sight of Ellen giving orders and the servants obeying. For her, it was unbearable. A widow, a poor woman, transforming the castle. Never. And, realizing that no one else dared confront her directly, Isabel understood what was the only weapon capable of destroying Eleanor's suspicion. One word, one rumor, and even a Lady Isabel was everything Ellen would never be. Beautiful, rich, covered in velvets and jewels. She walked through the castle as if the floor had been created only for her steps, and everyone bowed their heads when she passed. But behind the smiles and soft voice, there was something acidic and dangerous. She watched Ellen gain respect, give orders, move among the nobles as if she had a right to it. And that was an open wound for Isabel. On a freezing afternoon, she found Sir Geoffrey in the main hall watching the fire. "That woman is turning our home into a pigsty," she declared, her voice sweet enough to hide the poison. Geoffrey breathed deeply, torn between wounded pride and the memory of his sick children. "She saved Thomas and Anne," he murmured. Isabel drew closer. "Or perhaps she is enchanting everyone with tricks we do not even understand. Animals inside the house, strange mixtures, herbs and whispers, it seems. Witchcraft." The word hung in the air like a blade. Witchcraft. In 1415, an accusation like that could ruin reputations, families, and lives. Isabel knew this, and she smiled when she saw Sir Geoffrey shoot her. While she spread rumors through the kitchens and corridors, Ellen prepared an eternal stew over the fire, simple food, but enough to warm bodies and hearts. Isabel appeared beside her, flanked by Geoffrey himself. "And what is this?" she asked, pointing to the pot with repulsion. Ellen replied without fear. "It is food. It will keep everyone alive as long as the cold lasts." Isabel turned her face. "It looks like pig swill." "Geoffrey, see what she is doing to us?" Sir Geoffrey, tired of the humiliation of depending on a peasant woman, finally exploded. "Perhaps it has been enough." Ellen felt the air freeze around her. "My lord, the children still return to your village," he decreed. "We will finish without you." She tried to speak, but Lady Isabel raised her voice, sharp as a knife. "Return to the place you never should have left." A heavy silence fell over the hall. No protests, no explanations. Ellen was escorted by the same soldiers who had brought her. She felt the tears burn, but she did not shed them. Not in front of them. As she crossed the castle again toward the gate, the phrase echoed inside her like a sentence. "The poor are not allowed where wisdom bothers." What she did not know was that the decision to expel her would be the mistake that would unleash everything that would come after, including something far more dangerous than the cold. Ellen crossed the castle courtyard, feeling the invisible weight of hundreds of years of hierarchy crushing her steps. The soldiers escorting her were in no hurry. They enjoyed prolonging that moment. One of them even laughed when she slipped on the frozen mud. "Go back to the trash," which he murmured. Ellen did not respond. She kept her dignity like someone keeping fire under ashes, invisible on the outside, burning on the inside. When she arrived at her hut, her children ran to greet her. She hugged them both, breathing in the simple smell of their clothes, and only then did she allow a tear to escape. It was not for her. It was for the injustice. It was for knowing that saving lives was not enough when poverty was seen as a sin. But that same night, into Castle, Lady Margaret returned from a visit to the chapel and found the hall almost empty. "Where is Ellen?" she asked, searching with her eyes. A servant replied softly. "The lord of the castle sent her away." Margaret's fury was so great that no one dared move. "What have you done?" she shouted at her husband. "Geoffrey, you expelled the woman who saved our children." "It was going too far," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "We need order in this place." Margaret stepped forward, trembling. Not from cold, from rage. "She saved Thomas, and she saved you, who never thought to descend from your pride to learn from someone below your class." And then she turned her gaze to Isabel, who feigned surprise. "It was you, was it not? You poisoned." Ellen returned to the castle not as a servant, but as someone whose absence had left deep marks. That night, while placing heated stones around the children's beds, Lady Margaret sat beside her, as an equal. "Ellen, you lost your husband. How?" The question came carefully, like touching a wound that had never healed. Ellen stopped stirring the embers. The fire reflected in her eyes. "Cold," she replied, her voice firm. "He was strong, a woodcutter, but he came back one day with clothes soaked from sweat and ice. In 2 days, I buried him." Margaret brought her hand to her mouth. "I am so sorry." "After that," Ellen said, "I swore my children would never die like him. I learned everything the old women in the village knew. Not out of stubbornness, out of necessity. When you are poor, one mistake means death." Margaret held her hand. "You are not just strong, you are wise." "I am just stubborn," Ellen replied. "Stubborn enough not to let winter win." And that night, the stone house warmed in a different way. It was not just the fire. It was respect. With Isabel kept away from the children's rooms, Ellen began to act with total freedom, and the transformation accelerated. She created protected corridors with curtains, established a large cauldron of hot broth that never stopped boiling, sealed doors and windows with more straw and mud. Even Sir Geoffrey Suspicious had to admit the obvious. She knows what she is doing. The castle, little by little, began to breathe. The cold still roared outside, but inside there was life circulating. Children ran again. Servants stopped getting sick, and while the winter winds battered the walls, Ellen built formations against the ice as if it were an invisible army. But the winters seemed to have one last test in reserve. A brutal storm covered the region for 3 days, ripping off roofs and freezing underbrush, trees, and rivers. The woods turned into ice spikes. The entire village shut itself behind the huts. The castle vibrated like a ship in a storm. And, in the midst of that fury, Ellen did something unthinkable, even for Margaret. She gathered all the children nobles, servants, pageants, a single hall near the fire. Sir Geoffrey protested. "We cannot mix classes." But Ellen faced him without fear. The cold does not care about titles. Either we sleep together, or we die separately. And it was that phrase that saved everyone that night. Unbeknownst to them, the castle was not just learning to survive. It was learning to unlearn pride. But there was someone watching the rebirth of that place with burning hatred, and she had not yet given up. The storm brought 3 days of absolute terror. The stone walls trembled. The wind howled as if it wanted to tear the castle from the ground, and the snow beat against the windows with the force of a hammer. But inside, under the layers of blankets, embers, and curtains that Ellen had organized, no one died. No one froze. No one got sick. When the sun finally returned, pale and timid, Sir Geoffrey called everyone to the great hall. Ellen stood at the door. As always, but this time the lord of the castle did something no one expected. He knelt before her. "You saved my home, saved my children, and taught us something that not all of us together were able to learn." The silence was so absolute that even the hearth seemed to hold its breath. Ellen felt a weight lift from her chest. For the first time, she was not treated as dirt to be tolerated. She was recognized. She was necessary. After that day, the castle changed forever. Ellen began to teach her methods to the servants, the women, even the knights. She showed how to prepare the mixture to seal cracks, how to identify dangerous damp clothes, how to heat stones the right way. She transformed the castle into a refuge. But while this happened, Lady Sabé banished to a distant room planned her revenge. She could not attack Ellen directly. Not now that Sir Geoffrey and Lady Margaret protected her, but she knew that, in the heart of that castle, there was someone who always feared the unusual Father Anselm. A devout man, but rigid, concerned with anything that strayed from the rules. Isabel sought him in the chapel, with a low voice and feigned piety. "Father, I fear for this house." Ellen brings animals inside, prepares strange mixtures. There are those who say she whispers words at night. The priest frowned. "Witchcraft," Isabel sighed theatrically. "I dare not say. I only fear that God is being offended." It was the seed she needed to plant. The next day, Father Anselm sought out Sir Geoffrey and Margaret, and then came the phrase that made the hall air freeze even more. "There are dangerous signs in this house." and I fear that Ellen is practicing something that does not please the Lord." Lady Margaret exploded. "Be careful what you say." But Sir Geoffrey was torn. The word witchcraft was no mere rumor. It was a threat, and, for the first time since the winter began, Ellen was not facing just the cold. She was facing superstition, fear, and power. The winter had never been the greatest enemy. People, where? The priest's accusation fell over the castle like thunder. There was no evidence, no logic but in that time. Suspicion was enough. It was enough for someone to utter it. Ellen heard the rumor before she was even summoned. A servant passed her in the corridor and whispered, fearing to be overheard, "They are saying you are a witch." It was not the first time the world had tried to destroy what it did not understand, but now it was different. She did not have only her life at risk. She had the trust of the only family that had welcomed her. When Lady Margaret found her, Ellen was already prepared. "Father Anselm fears that your practices attract evil." Margaret sighed. Trying to hide her anguish, Ellen breathed deeply. "There is no way to prove I am not something I never was." And that was the cruelest truth of that era. Before Margaret could respond, a scream echoed through the castle. Thomas had disappeared. Panic spread like fire. Servants ran through the corridors. Knights shouted orders. Geoffrey paled. A storm had passed, but the cold was still deadly outside, and a child alone in the forest was a death sentence. Ellen pushed through them like someone following an ancient instinct. "Do not mount horses," she said. "They get stuck in the snow, and you do not know where to look." A knight laughed, nervously. "And you do?" Ellen looked at him as if facing death itself. "I know where a child runs when afraid." And instead of wasting time on arguments, she acted. She grabbed blankets, heated stones, and went ahead of the group. Her gaze read the snow as if it had been written for her. Small steps, branches broken at a boy's height, marks of disorientation. Every detail was a clue. The group advanced through the white forest, where silence seemed to scream. "What if it is too late?" Sir Geoffrey murmured. Ellen did not stop. "It will not be." After hours of walking, they found Thomas huddled under a fallen tree, trembling, too weak to call out. Ellen ran to him, wrapping the boy in blankets, placing hot stones against his chest and stomach, rubbing his hands and feet to reactivate circulation. Sir Geoffrey fell to his knees beside her, desperate. "Will he die?" Ellen looked at the boy and replied with the calm of someone who'd already conquered winter before. "Not if I can prevent it." And she could, and she would. Because in that frozen forest, it became clear who really knew how to save Livsand. Who only feared the unknown. The true battle was just beginning. The race back to the castle was a mix of panic and hope. Ellen walked quickly ahead, Thomas wrapped in the blankets and protected between the desperate mother and Sir Geoffrey. "With every step," she shouted. "Quick instructions no one dared question. Warm water, not hot. Change his clothes immediately. Keep the heated stones near his chest." When they arrived, the servants rushed to light all possible hearths. Ellen took control as if the castle were her own hut. Warming the boy gradually, removing moisture from the clothes, massaging hands and feet to bring the blood back. Lady Margaret knelt beside her son, repeating Elon's words like prayers. And then, after long hours, Thomas opened his eyes. It was just a whisper, but enough to break down the walls of fear surrounding the castle. "Ellen, you saved me." Sir Geoffrey breathed deeply, like someone returning to life. And for the first time, there was no doubt in his voice. "You saved my son twice. I was blind." That night, he summoned everyone to the main hall nights. Servants, maids, even Father Anselm. Ellen remained silent, with the sleeping boy in her arms. Sir Geoffrey walked to her and did something no noble would do without recognizing an absolute truth. He knelt for the second time before a peasant woman. "Anyone who touches this woman or accuses her of witchcraft will answer to me. She has more value and wisdom than any sword in this castle." Father Anselm bowed his head, ashamed. "I was wrong. I confuse fear with faith. I beg forgiveness." And Isabel, pale as snow, had no words. The castle no longer feared her. The next morning, Sir Geoffrey made an offer that would change the fate of Ellen and her children. Stay here. Be responsible for preparing these lands for all the winters to come. Ellen accepted. Not for honor, not for reward, but because she knew she would never again see children die from ignorance. Time passed, and spring arrived. The ice melted. Flowers bloomed on the slopes, and the castle became a living example that knowledge does not belong to classes, but to those who survive. Ellen taught all the methods. Layers of wool, aided stuns, embers under ashes, double doors to stop the wind. Always boiling hot broth, she transformed fear into intelligence. She transformed pride into humility. In that place, Ellen ceased to be just the poor widow. She became the woman who taught nobles to survive. She became living proof that when winter comes, whether cold or cruelty, it is the knowledge of the small that saves the world of the great. The winter finally surrendered. The snow melted slowly like forgiveness, and the castle breathed new air, not just because they survived, but because they learned. Ellen stayed there, not as a servant, but as the guardian of the knowledge that had saved everyone. They taught her to read the shadows of the windows to predict storms. They taught her to listen to the wind to discover if the snow would come wet or cutting, and she gave back by teaching everything she knew. Soon, servants and nobles alike made their own antechambers to block drafts. The heavy curtains became part of the castle forever. The eternal broth and continuous fire became tradition. Thomas and Anne ran through the courtyard like children who had never known fear. Ellen's children began to play with them without class distinction. The barrier between rich and poor lost strength before a truth no one could ignore anymore. Everyone breathed the same air, felt the same cold, and needed the same warmth. And in that silent rebirth, Sir Geoffrey did something even more unexpected. He called Ellen to the main hall, and before everyone, knights, servants, ladies, and children, he declared, "She is responsible for the safest winter this castle has ever seen. Nothing here would have survived without her hands." The recognition did not come with gold. It came with respect. Lady Margaret then delivered the final blow against the old hierarchies by saying, "From today, Ellen's lessons will be taught in all the villages and homes of our lands." It was official. The widow's knowledge was now law. Ellen felt her heart glow with something poverty rarely allows. Belonging. Her children were brought to live in the castle, and a modest house was built near the wall, so she would never again have to choose between helping the nobles or protecting her own children. The winter passed, but the story remained. And just as the cold winds gave way to warmth, the old borders of pride also began to melt. But there was someone who could not forget. In the most distant room, isolated forever, Lady Isabel watched everything through the narrow window. Spring may have arrived for everyone, but her heart remained frozen. She never accepted that a peasant woman had won where the nobles failed. She never accepted that wisdom came from when no one expected. And she never forgave the winter for choosing Ellen to be the woman who changed the fate of that castle forever. If this story moved you, if it touched your memory, your heart, and made you remember that there are still people capable of turning pain into strength, then do not let this video end here. Subscribe to the channel now, and turn on the bell. Here, every story has a hidden truth. Every chapter brings a new revelation, and every script is made to warm the soul. Do not leave without being part of this community. Click on subscribe, leave your like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. The next story is already being written and you will not want to miss it.